sure, Bilbao. It's an honor to be here in front of such a great audience of e-commerce professionals and entrepreneurs. How am I supposed to follow bringing back woolly mammoths from extinction? I'll do my best. I'd also like to thank the organisers for laying out my own Airbnb listing here on stage. My host in Bilbao at the moment isn't providing me with a pinball machine, so I think I might stay here tonight instead. So, while technology is absolutely fundamental to everything that we do at Airbnb, we're more than just a tech company. Our mission is to create a world where people feel that they can belong anywhere. And we describe Airbnb as the world's largest community-driven hospitality company. We run a global online marketplace that connects people who have space in their home with guests who are looking for somewhere to stay. Whether an apartment for one night, or a castle for a week, or a villa for a month, we connect people to unique travel experiences. And although we're an open marketplace that has a diversity of accommodation available, which includes some traditional bed and breakfast, and yes, some hotels, the thing we're best known for is home sharing. Real people sharing their homes with real people from around the world. So I'm going to start this afternoon with a brief recap of who we are, how it works, and how we've grown. I'll talk a little bit about the growth of the sharing economy, and particularly the way that it's creating trust among a network of users. And finally, because I'm the government relations guy, I'll talk a bit about what this means for cities and towns and the governments that run them, and how we tell our story to governments across the world, and particularly in Europe. So you're going to hear another founder story now. I know that tech conferences love to hear founder stories, so I don't want to disappoint you. Like most great ideas, Airbnb started by solving a problem. And in this case, it was the issue that two of our founders, Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky, were having problems paying their rent in San Francisco. And this was the apartment they moved to. When they left the Rhode Island School of Design, they moved to San Francisco hoping to find the next big thing. And while they were waiting for the next big thing to be found, they were running out of money. So they decided that they were going to use their apartment to pay for their apartment. They knew that there was a design festival coming to town in San Francisco, and San Francisco is a big place, but it actually doesn't have that many hotel rooms. So they figured that there would be people looking for somewhere to stay. So Joe pulled out of his cupboard a few inflatable mattresses, laid them on the floor, and we had the world's first airbed and breakfast. They decided to put up a website. Looks very 2007 now. It's very different from the one that we run today. They got the word out by speaking to a few bloggers that they knew, and within a few hours, they had their first guests. And it struck Brian and Joe that they might actually have stumbled on the next big thing after all. And actually, as an aside, you can book that apartment still on Airbnb. You can stay in the original airbed and breakfast. Brian then persuaded his colleague or friend, Nate, who was a software developer, to relocate from the East Coast, and they set up the company, and the company was founded. And if you haven't used Airbnb, why not? It's very, very, very simple. You find somewhere you'd like to stay, you contact the host and ask to come and stay with them. You communicate with one another to learn a little bit about each other, and then, if they like you, they can agree that you can come and stay at their place. They set the price, they set the terms and conditions, and we handle the money securely and safely. And at the end of the stay, the host and the guest review each other. It's very simple. And we've added lots of extra features to the site and to our mobile apps since then, and you can actually book some places instantaneously without having to go backwards and forwards to a host now. But the basic idea is still absolutely the same. What if you could book somebody's home in exactly the same way as you could book a hotel room? And the growth since then has been truly spectacular. This is the distribution of our listings in 2009, and in 2010, and in 2011, and it goes on and it goes on. And as you've seen from the numbers in the introductory video, we now have more than 800,000 listings in 34,000 locations worldwide in 190 countries. If you want to stay somewhere, the likelihood is there's an Airbnb there. And it's not just numbers of hosts that's grown over that time. The numbers of guests has also increased massively. It took 4 years to reach our millionth guest. It's taken 1 year to get from 10 to 25. And we are now hosting over 1 million guests a month in Airbnb properties. On our peak night this summer, 425,000 people were staying with Airbnb hosts around the world, which is pretty huge. But it's not just us. So Airbnb is one of a number of companies, vast number of companies now, who are participating in what has become known as the sharing economy. And there are simply hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies in this space. Cars, boats, dogs, clothes, cats, you name it, you can share it somewhere on the internet. And the question of how to define and measure and think about this group of companies is something that has really taken off in academic circles. And one of the best encapsulations of the sharing economy is this one, I think, which comes from an organisation called Nesta in the United Kingdom. And they think about sharing economy companies in 5 ways. They think about them as enabled by internet technologies. That's very obvious, matching up supply and demand through technology. We connect distributed networks of people and assets. We make use of idle capacity, spare stuff, but we also make use of downtime, people's skills, people's human resources. Crucially, there is meaningful interaction between the participants, and they are knitted together through trust, and I'll talk about trust in a second. And the companies tend to embrace openness, inclusivity, and a concept that they call the commons, which is essentially the idea that everything is owned by everybody. So that's what it is, but how big is it? PricewaterhouseCoopers, the consultants, have been looking at some of the 5 key sectors that sharing economy companies are currently working in, and they currently estimate that revenues in those sectors in the sharing economy are worth about 12 billion euros. But that could grow in 2025 to over 268 billion euros. I think it should be obvious from these kinds of numbers. This is not some kind of shadow or grey economy. This is becoming very big and very, very mainstream. So what drives the expansion of that pink to that pink? I think we could talk about lots of things that are very obvious, actually. Consumers like having more choice. They like accessing cheaper goods and services, and in some cases they get access to different goods and services than they would otherwise get. People can make extra money from their own things. There are lots of environmental benefits in terms of waste and energy. And the technology does allow hosts and guests to connect much more easily. But actually what really brings them together is what I talked about earlier, which is trust, and trust in networks. Think about it. When was the last time you met somebody for the first time? How long would it take you before you were prepared to let them come and stay in your house? A year? 2 years? We're trying to make that happen within the space of 3 or 4 hours. So trust and building trust quickly is what these platforms do absolutely brilliantly. And we clearly have a role to play in setting the community standards and giving a layer of protection on top of those peer-to-peer relationships that gives people confidence to share what is their most valuable asset with somebody they've never met before. So how do we do that? The first thing we do, of course, is to check that people are who they say they are. And we have a number of tools available to us to verify who people are. That includes linking to established social networks, and that actually helps people to identify not just that you are who you say you are, but learn a little bit about yourself. We also have the ability, and we sometimes choose for people to validate their identification using official ID or something like that. The second thing we do as a platform is we make sure that the transactions are secure and that people are communicating securely. And we also make sure that the money is being handled securely. When you check into an Airbnb, your money is not released to the host until 24 hours after you've checked in case it's not what you paid for. In the rare cases when things do go wrong, we've got what we call our host guarantee, which is a guarantee to the host against any damage to their property. We're on hand with customer service to deal with anything that crops up. We're very vigilant and employ teams of people to look for fraud and to look for bad actors of all kinds on the platform. These things are not necessarily unique to the sharing economy. What is unique to the sharing economy is the concept of peer-to-peer review systems. And clearly, eBay was a pioneer in this area. But actually, eBay transactions are pretty binary. You either get what you paid for, or you didn't get what you paid for. And clearly, when you're spending 2 weeks staying in somebody's house, the level of feedback that you're going to need and you're going to want to give is going to be immeasurably larger. So from the outset, we've always allowed hosts to review guests and guests to review hosts. Yes, providing candid feedback to one another about how things went, but the really important bit is the public feedback that allows you to understand what you're getting as a potential host or guest next time. So these online reputations are being built. This one is mine, right? And I can tell you, I'm a fantastic guest. And in fact, I don't need to tell you that. All of these people will tell you that I'm a fantastic guest as well. Earlier this year, we made some changes to this system to really take it to the next level. It used to be that you left reviews independently. I would leave one, and then a few days would pass, and then my host would leave one for me. And that led to a couple of outcomes. The first is that I might not give really bad feedback to a host because they might retaliate and give me bad feedback. Equally, I might give really good feedback in the hope that they would leave me really good feedback too. So today, we publish them simultaneously. They go up at the same time, so there can be no chance of gaming the system. The initial results are really striking. We have a team of psychologists that are crunching through the numbers at the moment. But what I can tell you is that the number of reviews on the site has gone up by about 8%. So people are more ready to leave feedback than they were before. And the distribution of the ratings across the 1 to 5 scale has become more even. So again, people I think are becoming a lot more honest, and more honesty means a lot more trust. So this kind of community-based self-regulation is really, really powerful as a signal of quality and standards. The fact that bad reviews might lead to fewer bookings, or as a guest, bad reviews might mean that you're less likely to be accepted as a guest somewhere in the future, means that everybody has incentives to behave well. And while these systems aren't the only thing that can guarantee safety and quality, we think that when regulators are looking at services like Airbnb, they need to starting with what exists and what's working well. They may have a role to play in adding additional layers of protection on top of what exists. But let's start with what works, would be our message and is our message. So what does this all mean for cities? Now, you've heard already today that the rise of new business models is creating some regulatory challenges around the world, but this is absolutely not a new thing. In 1865, the British Parliament passed a new law to govern the emergence of these new self-propelled machines and their disruptive influence on cities. And what it meant was that self-propelled vehicles were limited to 6 kilometres an hour in the countryside and 3 kilometres an hour in cities. They had to be manned by 3 people, one of whom had to walk in front of it, waving a red flag to warn people of the oncoming danger. Now, it can sometimes sound in the press as if we're involved in discussions across the world with governments who are absolutely fixated on creating new kinds of laws like this to apply to Airbnb. And that is absolutely not the experience I've had so far. It is true, hosts across Europe have an incredibly different set of rules to live by. They've got rules, different rules from city to city that govern the use of their housing. They've got different rules that dictate where tourists can sleep and where tourists cannot sleep. There are regulations that govern when you've stopped being a person and started being a business. And they're different from one place to the next. And of course, there are also rules about what taxes you need to pay and how you need to pay them. And for the most part, our hosts are doing this very occasionally and using their own homes. And that can be a very bewildering and confusing set of laws to deal with. So we're in constant conversation with governments across Europe about how to make things simpler and how to make sure that this does not happen in Europe. All of the ones that we've spoken to, or pretty much everywhere we speak to, they recognise sharing is here to stay. That growth I talked through earlier, that's not going to change anytime soon. Sharing is absolutely here to stay. What they do have are some very legitimate questions about how it should be regulated, and those are absolutely conversations that we're happy to have, and we have every single day. We are always the first to applaud new regulations when they're smartly developed and fairly enforced. We play a part in making that happen too. Firstly, we conduct research. We publish evidence about the impact that we have on our host community, the value that we add to guests, and what those two things together do for towns and cities, and the impact that it has on local economies and local communities. We've now conducted studies in 11 of our top markets. This one was published last week and relates to Montreal in Quebec in Canada. The data is pretty consistent across every single market that we survey. 82% of our community, the vast majority, are sharing only the home in which they live. 50% of the hosts are on moderate to low incomes, and 47% are actually just like Joe and Brian were. They need the income to help pay for the place that they live. We also profile our guests. This is data that we released this morning and relates to Barcelona, where there has been a huge debate, as we all know, about the quality and volume of tourism in that great city. And we wanted to survey our guests to show that they want different things from tourism. These are not the typical budget tourists. They want to live like locals. That's the 72% number at the bottom. These are very different travellers, so we use data to tell the stories of our guests as well as our hosts. Those guests stay in completely different areas of the city. This is Paris. Every blue dot on this map is a hotel. Every pink dot on this map is an Airbnb property. And you can see that we are spreading tourism into areas that don't normally see tourists. And we're spreading their spending, more crucially. 76% of Airbnb properties lie beyond the main hotel districts in the cities that we've surveyed. Guests stay for longer. Why? They're probably spending less on the accommodation, so they can stay for an average of 5 nights instead of the 2.8 nights that a typical guest stays. And they spend more. They spend more, and they spend more locally. About half of all Airbnb guest spending happens in the immediate neighbourhood in which they're staying. But we also measure and look at the social impact that we have, both good in good times and also in bad times. This is the eastern United States after Hurricane Sandy struck. And what happened was that 1,400 of our hosts in New York City listed their apartments and rooms in their apartments for free to house people who had been left homeless as a result of the hurricane. That is now a model that we've replicated in countless other places worldwide, and we're ready to activate our host community to take in people whenever it's needed. And we've also formalised that relationship in some places, most recently in the state of Victoria in Australia, where Melbourne is, where we've made a formal commitment to help disaster recovery issues there. But it's also good stuff too. So the World Cup in Brazil, this VW camper pootled up and down Copacabana Beach during the World Cup advertising Airbnb. 1 in 5 people that travelled to Brazil for the World Cup this summer stayed in an Airbnb. And that demonstrates to you the ability of networks like ours to scale up very quickly when we need to. And the World Cup is just one example. If you think about Oktoberfest in Munich, or the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, or the annual Arts Festival in Edinburgh, we can increase scale and decrease scale as we need to. We call it unlocking the hidden infrastructure of a city. So that's how we tell our story, and we are making progress. So in discussions with the city of Hamburg, we were able to secure a law that says if it's your own home, you can host guests there without the need for permission. We've secured the same law in Paris and in fact across France. And as a result of that law, we've also been able to start talking to Paris, to the government in Paris, about collecting tourist tax on behalf of our hosts and passing it to the government, which is a crucial source of revenue for cash-strapped governments at the moment. In Amsterdam, we gave input into the world's first law specifically about sharing your home. And the government, the city of Amsterdam, has taken steps to help educate the citizens of Amsterdam about being a good host and looking after your neighbours as you host. And in the UK, in London, I'm working to secure clarity for our hosts on the same point, that if it's your home, you can share it with guests without the need to get permission. And of course, London is one of the world's busiest cities and one of the world's most expensive cities. And so the debate there has been about how to do that in a way that preserves housing stock in the city. I could go on. Athens, Dublin, Lisbon, Milan, even here in Spain, where the Markets and Competition Authority has started looking at how the collaborative economy might have a positive impact on the economy. And I'm just very briefly going to read you something that they say, which I wholly agree with. There is no doubt that increased choice and diversity of products and services enhances consumer welfare, provides greater transparency of information to consumers, reduce transaction costs, and lower environmental impacts. We agree, and we welcome this consultation. So, as a final plug for our website, if you're really interested in getting updates on everything that we're doing around the world in my field, you can go to our website, which is the public policy blog there. So, I've given you a brief flavour of us as a company, how we think about ourselves, and the conversations that we've been having around Europe. And I just want to go back to our vision and show you something that I think encapsulates exactly what we mean by Belong Anywhere. This is a film we released to coincide with the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I think it absolutely tells the story of what belonging anywhere means.
Berlin, 1987. My father was a guard on the west side of the Berlin Wall, while another man guarded the east. Eventually the wall came down, but even after moving away, my father carried a piece of it with him. While I grew up, it lingered over all of us, a barrier between him and the rest of the world. I decided I would help by taking him back to Berlin to show him the beautiful place it had become. When we arrived, the stranger who answered the door became familiar. The guard who patrolled the opposite side of the wall now welcomed us as a friend. After that, things were better for my father. Airbnb. Belong anywhere.
¿Preguntas? Supongo que esta vez sí que habrá alguna, ¿no? ¿No?
You all want your
Sí,
mojitos, that's
por
what
allí,
you want.
por allí tenemos una pregunta.
A short question. What about experience? When are you going to add some leisure activities to your product?
It's a very good question. We did some trials this year about exactly that, and in some cities where you could book your accommodation but also add on some extra things, and we tried some things with dinner parties and we tried some things with tour guides, and we're still thinking about how we're going to do that, but we are definitely thinking much more about the whole trip and not just the place that you stay. So I think the question is whether we try and do that ourselves, whether we get the hosts to do that on behalf of the guests, or whether there are some third-party partnerships that we can develop to pull together a whole magical trip for people. It's a good question and one that we're definitely looking at.
Just quite interesting about the reviews. That the reviews that you are showing is about individuals, people. Have you ever think of the impact that could have that type of review of individuals in terms of to apply for a job that human resources might have a look and you have some bad experience? Have you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the eternal question about your life and your identity online. Now, I may have really great reviews as a guest. It doesn't make me a brilliant employee. I happen to be a brilliant employee. But it doesn't necessarily tell you anything about what I'd be like as a plumber or an electrician. I think the key thing about this is you have to be prepared to be transparent. This is a community, and you're buying into a community. So the level of honesty that you need to have and be prepared to take as a participant in that community is kind of part of the bargain here.
I would like to ask you, is similar, is a kind of couchsurfing community, this kind of company that you are talking about? It's a kind of couchsurfing, no? Because I have friends from couchsurfers, and it's for young people and for travelers around the world. So maybe it's similar.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of staying in somebody else's home is not a new one. It's been going on for millennia. And yes, couchsurfing, I think, is one of the things that people still think about when they imagine Airbnb. And I think we've become a lot bigger than that. You don't have 25 million guests who are all sleeping on other people's couches. And genuinely, you can stay in a Scottish castle or on a Caribbean island all to yourself in some of the most incredible apartments in the world, and yes, on somebody's couch. So we really are offering a broader thing. And anecdotally, I know that many of my friends who are in their late 30s and early 40s, are feeling that they can travel more frequently with their small children because they know they can rent a whole apartment that has bedrooms and a kitchen, and they can have a much better time than perhaps they could have had if they tried to squeeze into one hotel room, or frankly they wouldn't have gone at all. So we're really about broadening this and making it a much more mainstream activity.
People vote for as a guest, for example, you vote with a number for a place.
So what do you mean?
You know what I mean? Is if you can vote for a place, for a good place, no? For 1, 2, 3, or 2 or 9, no? Because here we have many kind of websites where you can vote the place. You can see if at 8 points, 9 points is a very good place, like such as e-booking.
Get you. So the review scores are from 1 score to 5 on a number of different levels. So location and quietness, and so it's not just one measure. When you give feedback, you're giving a score on a number of different things. So if you like staying in a in a square that's all about parties and bars and restaurants, obviously, is it quiet is going to get a low score. But that's what you might be looking for. So we try and make it a very granular, much more specific set of feedback.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Patrick, thank you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. Pulled out of his cupboard a few inflatable mattresses, laid them on the floor, and we had the world's first airbed and breakfast. They decided to put up a website. Looks very 2007 now. It's very different from the one that we run today. They got the word out by speaking to a few bloggers that they knew, and within a few hours, they had their first guests. And it struck Brian and Joe that they might actually have stumbled on the next big thing after all. And actually, as an aside, you can book that apartment still on Airbnb. You can stay in the original airbed and breakfast. Brian then persuaded his colleague or friend Nate, who was a software developer, to relocate from the East Coast, and they set up the company, and the company was founded. And if you haven't used Airbnb, why not? And the governments that run them, and how we tell our story to governments across the world, and particularly in Europe. So you're going to hear another founder story now. I know that tech conferences love to hear founder stories, so I don't want to disappoint you. Like most great ideas, Airbnb started by solving a problem. And in this case, it was the issue that two of our founders, Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky, were having problems paying their rent in San Francisco. And this was the apartment they moved to. When they left the Rhode Island School of Design, they moved to San Francisco hoping to find the next big thing. And while they were waiting for the next big thing to be found, they were running out of money. So they decided that they were going to use their apartment to pay for their apartment. They knew that there was a design festival coming to town in San Francisco, and San Francisco is a big place, but it actually doesn't have that many hotel rooms. So they figured that there would be people looking for somewhere to stay. So, Joe... Hi, Bilbao. It's an honor to be here in front of such a great audience of e-commerce professionals and entrepreneurs. How am I supposed to follow bringing back woolly mammoths from extinction? I'll do my best. I'd also like to thank the organisers for laying out my own Airbnb listing here on stage. My host in Bilbao at the moment isn't providing me with a pinball machine, so I think I might stay here tonight instead. So, while technology is absolutely fundamental to everything that we do at Airbnb, we're more than just a tech company. Our mission is to create a world where people feel that they can belong anywhere. And we describe Airbnb as the world's largest community-driven hospitality company. It's very, very, very simple. You find somewhere you'd like to stay, you contact the host and ask to come and stay with them. You communicate with one another to learn a little bit about each other, and then, if they like you, they can agree that you can come and stay at their place. They set the price, they set the terms and conditions, and we handle the money securely and safely. And at the end of the stay, the host and the guest review each other. It's very simple. And we've added lots of extra features to the site and to our mobile apps since then, and you can actually book some places instantaneously without having to go backwards and forwards to a host now. But the basic idea is still absolutely the same. What if you could book somebody's home in exactly the same way as you could book a hotel room? And the growth since then has been truly spectacular. This is the distribution of our listings in 2009, and in 2010, and in 2011. We run a global online marketplace that connects people who have space in their home with guests who are looking for somewhere to stay. Whether an apartment for one night, or a castle for a week, or a villa for a month, we connect people to unique travel experiences. And although we're an open marketplace that has a diversity of accommodation available, which includes some traditional bed and breakfasts, and yes, some hotels, the thing we're best known for is home sharing. Real people sharing their homes with real people from around the world. So, I'm going to start this afternoon with a brief recap of who we are, how it works, and how we've grown. I'll talk a little bit about the growth of the sharing economy, and particularly the way that it's creating trust among a network of users. And finally, because I'm the government relations guy, I'll talk a bit about what this means for cities and towns